And now you could say to me, Rachel, this is lovely. You've talked for 10 minutes, and you haven't said anything about women, but we understand completely why women could say Kaddish, right? It's a custom. There's no obligation. I don't have to worry about levels of obligation. Even Ketanim can say it. Of course, things that minors can do, women can do. The end, like I can go home. I didn't need to write about 90 pages on the topic, right? Why? So what's the issue? What's at stake? What's going on? So what's very interesting about Mourner's Kaddish that is different than other topics having to do with women is that the sort of the issues at play are not about what's my level of obligation, what's your level of obligation. Right? All the more so, when a Mourner says Kaddish, he's not being motzi someone else in saying Kaddish. Right? It functions in a totally different way. And so the issues that are at play when thinking about can a woman say Kaddish are completely different than the issues that are at play when we're talking about can she say Kiddush, can she read Megillah, etc. So in here I bring lots of text to tell you, but I'm just going to summarize for you what some of the issues are so then when we look at the text we can understand them. There are a number of issues that aren't about the core words of Kaddish, but are about the sort of way that Kaddish is said that surround Kaddish that cause some problems. Number one, as we mentioned, Kaddish needs a minyan. You need to be in the presence of a minyan to recite the Kaddish, and the whole purpose and efficiency of Kaddish is that the minyan hears you and responds. Now, originally, for many hundreds of years, the perception was that the women's section was such a distinct and separate domain that when you were standing in it, you were not in the presence of a minyan, right? And we know this because there are texts that nothing to do with women that say, well, a man who's standing in the women's section, can he be counted in the minyan, right? As late as the beginning of the 20th century, the Aruch HaShulchan paskins that men in the women's section cannot join to make up the 10 of the minyan. Now, you can imagine if you've visited shuls in Europe, or even probably in Brooklyn or Meir Sharm, there's sometimes mechitzas that literally, it's a totally, in Baltimore. Ooh, whoops. Okay, whoops. In Baltimore. There are women's sections that are completely distinct in other rooms. It's a whole entire wall, maybe with a grate or maybe with a small window, right? They are not, right? The whole point is to create a reshut here and a reshut there, to create two separate and distinct areas. And so if a woman was standing in the women's section, she would not be in the presence of the minyan. And so what's going to happen is we're going to see a number of texts that are going to make statements like women can't say Kaddish in the synagogue, right? Women can't say Kaddish in the Beit Knesset. And we have to understand that it's not going to be essentially about the words of the Kaddish that are problematic for her saying. It's about where she's located. So there are two possible solutions to this problem that she needs to be in the presence of a minyan. Solution number one is that she enters into the men's section. That would be the first solution, to bring women into the men's section. And in some of the texts, that happened, and throughout Jewish history, that happened. It mentions that this happens. In the text that I have before you, in the text that I have before you, I'll just show you quickly a few examples of this. If you flip ahead to page 12, flip ahead to page 12. This is a tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Now, it's nothing to do with women saying Kaddish. It's a very famous tshuva about, do you need a mechitza for just one or two women? And the questioner wants to know, in a case of if you just have a Beit Midrash that doesn't have a mechitza and a woman comes, right, normally like during the weekdays, they don't go into the main sanctuary, do you need a mechitza? And in the second paragraph he says, V'hinei b'chol hadorot nahagu shelafamim hayta nechneset isha aniyah lebeit hamidrash lekabel tzedakah or avila lomar kaddish. He says in all the generations, there have been times that we sometimes have a woman enter into the men's section. If she was a poor woman to get tzedakah, or if she was a mourner to say Kaddish, right? And he just mentions it as, here's an example of when this happens. He goes on to paskin that if she's always going to come and it's going to be every day, then you should make sure you had a mechitza. But if it's a one-off situation, it's possible that you don't need a mechitza. His proof, just because it's so interesting, I'll tell you what his proof is. At the end he says, I have a proof to show you that min hadin, right, it's possible that one woman can enter into the Beit Midrash without a mechitza, from the fact that the Shulchan Aruch says that women can get aliyot on Shabbat. right? Not that Rav Moshe Feinstein is supporting partnership minyanim, but he looks at the Breita. The Breita says that women can get aliyot on Shabbat. We just don't do it because of kavod tzibor. If the halacha is that they could get aliyot, it must be that you didn't need a mechitza for 1 or 2 women, right? How else would she get up to the Torah? She has to cross the mechitza, which to me is great. He paskins halacha l'maisa about the mechitza, not about women getting aliyot. And in this, he mentions that he knows there are times when women cross the mechitza. One of them is to say Kaddish. Same thing if you flip the page, in the name of Rav Soloveitchik, and everyone we're going to come to Rav Soloveitchik at the end, but everyone who talks to Rav Soloveitchik, he always mentioned this on the bottom in the English. He said, he told me he remembered being in Vilna at the Gaon's Kolis, which wasn't one of your modern Orthodox shuls, and a woman came into the back, there was no Ezrat Nashim, and said Kaddish after Marav, right? There too, in the Vilna Gaon's shul, a woman went into the women's section. Rav Henkin, we don't need to read it inside, mentions that when he was young in Belarus, he saw a woman come into the after Marav into the men's section to say Kaddish. So there were definitely shuls that allowed women to enter into the men's section. Of course, there are people that didn't feel comfortable with that. And so some of the opposition to women saying Kaddish, particularly in shul, is going to be about, well, I don't really feel comfortable. I'm going to have issues of modesty. But the issues of modesty are going to be about crossing into this into this sex-segregated space. So that's possibility number 1 of how to get the woman into the presence of a minyan, bring her into the men's section. Possibility number 2 is to bring the minyan to her, is to have a minyan in the home. And so a lot of the texts are going to talk about having women say Kaddish in the home in the presence of a minyan. And the earliest ones that we're going to see are going to be from that perspective. The second problem with women saying Kaddish, or difficulty that arises, is the following. Originally, and there's still a few communities who have this custom, Kaddish was said by a single mourner. We didn't have a whole group of people say Kaddish together, right? I think in Yekashul, what?
Here, in the German shul.
In the German shul, they have only one.
They kept the German custom, but they've dropped it.
Oh, they've dropped. Well, so originally, that's how everyone said Kaddish. It was just one person who said Kaddish. Now, the thing is, how do you figure out who gets to be that one person? There is a whole prioritization system set up, a whole hierarchy set up of how to figure that out. And the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlis, in one of his longest notes in the Shulchan Aruch, outlines this. The reason it's a long note is none of the codes beforehand, not in the Rambam, not in the Torah, and not in Rav Yosef Kar's Shulchan Aruch, mention Mourner's Kaddish at all. Then it's not in the codes. The Ramah is the first code to mention it, and he has an extremely long note where he says, this is how you figure it out. Is it during Shiva? Is it during Shloshin? Do they have a yurt site? Is there more than one brother? Are there 3 brothers? Is there visitors from out of town? Are we going to give rights to visitors from out of town? What's your custom, etc.? There's a whole way you figure it out. And it's a very, very long and complicated process, which we sometimes use now for how we decide who should daven, right? And so then the question becomes, do women have rights within this hierarchy? The Ramah did not mention a daughter within the hierarchy. He didn't delineate a daughter. Is she going to outrank other people? Are we going to let her be the single person saying it? Being a single person is more like being a shliach tzibur, is more like a leader of the community. How do I feel about that? Can I get confused with other things, etc.? So that's some of the issues that are going to be at play. So it's slightly different issues than the question of the essential core of can she say Kaddish.